God, it's bloody cold. Oh, my fire's not going. Hello, darlings. January's over. Isn't that lovely? Still a bit cold. Got the fire going. That'll be nice. I thought I'd just do a little wrap-up of my January book reads. I've got some tea. I've got some books. Be good. Bit more in depth than the video I did last week about all the books I read in 2020. But, you know, we'll get through it. I read 6 books. Here they are. That's not the order, but, you know, close enough. So, I started the month with Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I managed to pick up this gorgeous edition from 1950, which actually has a message written in the cover, which is really nice. To Mrs. Exton, with best wishes for Xmas 1920, yours, Bull. That's adorable. Like, I'll see if that picks up. That's really nice, and this is a lovely copy. I managed to get my hands on this for free, which is crazy. I do have a love of proper old copies of books, and yeah, I read this. It took me a little while because I wasn't able to read it on the go with this being such an old copy. It's, what, 116 years old, this book? Insanity. And I gave it a 5 out of 10. I use an out of 10 system at home. On Goodreads, what I do is I just halve whatever I give them out of 10 and then round up to the nearest. So yeah, I gave this a 5 out of 10. I have read a lot of old literature, as you will have seen in my yearly wrap-up last week. So I'm pretty used to approaching these texts. Tarzan was interesting because obviously I'm very familiar with the Disney film, and the Disney film, you know, when I was a kid, I always thought Disney films were quite faithful adaptations, and I've been proven wrong multiple times. When I read Hunchback a couple of years back, ooh, I was surprised at how dark Hunchback is. I had the same thing with Tarzan. There's a lot more death than in the book, pretty early on. Don't know if I should give a spoiler warning for an 115-year-old book. I'm not going to give a spoiler warning. Like, Carla dies really early on, Tarzan kills Kerchak, like, their family name is Clayton. John Clayton, like, as an antagonist, doesn't exist in the book, which is crazy to me. Like, John Clayton was his father in the book, which I think is it's an interesting change that Disney made. I don't know if I agree with it, personally, but then again, in the book there is technically no antagonist, really. There are antagonists that crop up, like Sabor is in it early on, and there's, like, you know, some nasty crewmen and pirates and stuff, but no one's substantial. There's no overwhelming villain, it feels like. It feels more like the biggest villain is mainly Tarzan kind of reconciling with the fact that he is not an ape. Which is fascinating as, like, a character arc, but, you know, it doesn't really give the book the sense of drama that I think it really needed when you compare it to things like Moby Dick or Hunchback, where there are definitive villains that, you know, cause problems for the protagonist. I don't think there's really the same thing in Tarzan, unfortunately. One thing I did think was curious was how often Edgar Rice Burroughs describes how handsome Tarzan is. That was really curious. At every turn, whenever he's describing Tarzan from someone else's perspective, he always seems to take the time to mention how handsome Tarzan is, which, you know, I'm not complaining about. We all like a handsome jungle man. But that felt unusual for a book of this age. There was a point that really dated it early on. I'm going to see if I can find it because it is so curious. It's during the early chapters when Tarzan's parents, John and Alice, are on they're on a ship. Yeah, some neighbours are having a soiree. We'll deal with that. We'll deal with it. And yeah, they're on this ship and they've just found out about the mutiny that's going on. And John Clayton is talking his wife down. They're like he's calming her down. And he just says, like, all she needs to say, really, kind of, you know, I'm glad that you're here to look after me, but, you know, she says more than that, and it's a bit much. Here we go. So they've just discussed the mutiny, and she says, "Ah, John, I wish that I might be a man with a man's philosophy, but I am a woman, seeing with my heart rather than my head, and all that I can see is too horrible, too unthinkable to put into words." I'm not saying that Edgar Rice Burroughs was a misogynist. What I am saying is that's unnecessary. And that's a problem that happens for a lot of the female characters. There is a maid that Jane Porter has later in the book, who's written kind of to fulfill that stereotype of kind of the Southern African American maid character, kind of caricature that appears in a lot of older media, and it, yeah, felt a bit weird. Felt a bit weird reading that now. But still, I enjoyed myself. Jesus Christ. Yeah, it felt a bit weird, but, you know, I still enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I would recommend... I mean, I can't recommend the other books in the series because I've not read them yet, but I think I will, you know. I mean, it'd be really nice to track down all of them from, like, the early years of their publishing, to have, like, a matching antique set. But that's probably going to be expensive in the long run. So, the second book I read, if I just move these, was Cults and Isms by J. Oswald Sander. This was my first foray into the world of theology, really. I've not read a lot of theology so far. I wasn't raised in like a Christian household, so I didn't really go up around a lot of theology, and it's always been a subject that's interested me. And Cults and Isms is J. Oswald Sander's kind of taking down of what he sees as modern heresies. So I think he's, like, you know, pretty Catholic, and he talks against kind of Mormonism and evangelicalism and various different what he perceives as cults within contemporary Christianity, which was fascinating and confusing in equal measure, which, you know, all good books, perhaps. I gave this a 2 out of 10 though, because, good God, like, maybe this was the wrong text to enter theology with. Maybe one of my February reads is going to be a better introduction, and we'll get to that in my February reads video. But yeah, it was just a very baffling read, but not a difficult read. I think there's a distinction to draw there. I think it would have been a difficult read if he'd been less clear in his ideas, but he does write in a very modern tone. It's quite a modern book. I think this copy is from 1980, I want to say. I think 1980. You know, it reads like a modern text, which was very refreshing after Tarzan. Very refreshing. So, yeah, that's a 1 out of 10. 2 out of 10, sorry. 1 out of 5. I wouldn't recommend Cults and Isms unless you're really down the rabbit hole of theological debate. But arguably, there are better discussions on it, better discussions about theology. A lot of, say, Cornel West's lectures online are fascinating discussions of contemporary theological ideas, and particularly about the role of Christianity in the world. I think that's a better resource than Cults and Isms by J. Oswald Sanders. It was fine, I guess, and maybe this is one that I'll come back to when I've read more theological philosophy. I'll come back to this, and it will then be contextualized by these other theological ideas that I've gone to. Next up was The Power of Words by Simone Weil? Weil? Weil. I'm gonna say Weil. This is from the Penguin's Great Ideas series, which I kind of collect. It's a soft collect. This, by the way, is maybe the worst cover I've ever seen. I think this is terrible design. I get what they're trying to do. I really do. But good. There are better ways to do it than this. And what I think is really funny is that the text on the front is actually the text from inside the book. I just think, in my mind, that's lazy design. And I've seen Penguin do better. So that's that. I gave this a 6 out of 10, you know, so that's 3 out of 5 on Goodreads. I would recommend. I think it's really interesting, especially in contemporary society where it's so easy to get your words out there. I think it was really interesting, and she does talk a lot about kind of how speech can affect you and how text can affect you, internalized ideas that come with that. It kind of led to a lot of really interesting ideas. It's really good, and especially as part of the Great Ideas series, I think it plays alongside a lot of those texts. A couple of the texts that I finished 2020 with, they played quite nicely alongside this. I mean, obviously Kant and Schopenhauer were talking about different things, but you know, it's pretty good. It's pretty fun. It's not like the densest philosophical text I've ever read. I mean, I started reading philosophy with Nietzsche, so like Nietzsche, who knows how to pronounce his name, and that was dense going. So this was pretty breezy, you know, pretty good. I quite enjoyed this one. Next up, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. My first time reading Virginia Woolf. This is from the Penguin Clothbound Philosophy, and oh, it was lovely. I gave this a 6 out of 10 as well, so another 3 out of 5. Maybe I should reassess the ranking of Power of Words because this was really nice to read. This was a pleasure to read, and it's kind of taken from a collection of her lectures, basically. It's her editing her lectures into a book and talking about the importance of like the power over your own space, which as someone who lives on their own, it really struck a chord with me, really resonated with me. I think I'll probably end up getting more in this series, but I'm worried about the overlap. You know, if I'm already collecting the paperback classics series, I don't want to like it all depends how I feel at the time when like I have bigger bookcases where I can display them all together. But you know, this was really fun. This was really fun and a lovely edition. I love a hardback. Paperbacks I'm so worried about destroying, but like hardback books, you know, durable. That's what I like in a book. Also, fantastic cover design, simple, to the point. I like that it kind of mimics kind of architectural drawing, and like that it's clearly rooms with doors. That's at least what I get from it, and I think that's a lovely bit of design, especially the alternating line pattern. I think that's what good cover, like, to compare it, no. For starters, I don't think the writing is even that clear. But that, oof, that's good. That's the good stuff. That's what we like. Next, I read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This gorgeous edition again, another nice hardback, which is always welcome. Without the cover on, it's just bright orange, which is very nice, very nice. This is actually my sister's favourite book, so she's been recommending it to me for a few years now, and it lived up. This I gave 9 out of 10. So, you know, really good. He reminds me a lot of Victor Hugo in his writing. He's like seems to manage to be able to cover both like the personal and the epic in his plots, because this does cover 100 years and it covers an entire village's rise, establishment and eventual decline. And like the scope of what he is talking about and the time frames he's talking about is inconceivable for, you know, a lot of people who haven't lived for 100 years. And there's like one chapter where the village all floods, and then in like a sentence he's like, and then it didn't rain for 11 years, which is a crazy sentence to be able to write. And like there's this chapter early on where like there's a plague on the town where people are forgetting things and they have to put bells and stuff and like label everything. It's really, really fascinating. I really like the voice he writes in. I read the General in His Labyrinth a few years back, and yeah, I really like his voice. I can see why he is so lauded over. I can see why my sibling likes him so much. He's excellent. Really, really highly recommend this. Yeah, just wonderful. Had a great time reading it. And then my final book, January, I said this would be quick, Hes On Connection by Kae Tempest. I was actually able to get a signed edition of this through Waterstones. Wonderful. And yeah, lovely cover, and I love the choice when you take off the dust cover to have it in this kind of like, I don't know what you'd even call that, like a powder blue maybe? It's a very light blue, and it's just lovely, especially going against this kind of rust coloured inner lining. But this isn't a book cover review, this is a book talk about. This was a 10 out of 10 for me. They're talking about the importance of the arts as a means of connection and their relationship with the arts, and I think that's fascinating. It came to me at a time when I really needed to hear that as well. It was like, you know, quite enlightening to read at the moment. So especially as someone who works in live arts a lot, like it was really important to read them go through their process and their relationship with their artistic process, which is another interesting factor of it. And having seen them live a few times, it's really interesting to hear how they think about the way that they process things and how their relationship to their practice has changed, which, you know, I think it's important with any kind of artistic practice to recognise the way your practice is evolving. My personal practice has certainly evolved in the years that I've been doing the arts, so, you know, it was nice to hear from someone who is very successful in the arts, I think, talk about how their relationship with it has changed and how at times they've gone through the motions of it rather than actually committing, and like the toll that working in the arts has taken on them, and how the power of recognition. That was a really interesting point in the book where they're talking about how the different way that people spoke to them about their practice once they found that they made money from it. And that was really interesting to read, because I think so often there's a focus on how you make money from the arts, and that is important. There is a place for that, but I don't know if often we think about that more than we think about the actual practice of the art, which I think is, if anything, you know, I think that's maybe more important than making money from it. It's easy for me to say as someone who doesn't make that much money from it, who earns their living doing other things, but really beautiful text. Kae Tempest is such a gifted writer, so skilled, like real, you can tell there's craft and there's a lot of care that's put into the use of language, which is really exciting. So yeah, those are the 6 books that I read in January. You know, none of them too thick. I think the largest was 420 odd pages, and I think the shortest was probably Power of Words, which is probably around 100 or so pages. Like, I can pick them up with one hand. So yeah, those are my 6 books. Next week I'll be talking about the books I'll be reading in February, so come back for that if you're interested. See you next time, darlings.